everybody, and thank you for joining us for our third webinar. Today's topic is environmental legislations and how they're relevant to the hospitality industry. Obviously, that's quite a chunky topic. We're going to try and dissect it for you. So we actually haven't listed all the laws that we are covering. We do have a comprehensive list of those, so if you're interested, let us know. But we thought there are enough. Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for our third webinar. Slight technical glitch there, apologies. So yes, we're not going to list all of the laws. You can get them from us. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, Isaac and Bud, who are the experts on the issue. So gentlemen, over to you and off we go.
Thank you very much. So thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. I'm Bud and I'm a sustainability advisor here at Considerate Group. And as Xenia said, we'll be touching on some major European environmental policies and also some global environmental themes and importantly, what this means for your hospitality business. So a great deal of environmental legislation and guidelines exist. And keeping up to date with all the new legislation and understanding what existing legislation is still relevant all make this an incredibly confusing topic. Of great significance is the European Green Deal. So we've developed the webinar of this from the framework of the European Green Deal. However, the topics that we cover are extremely important to all EU member and non-EU member countries as they feed back to the overall target of limiting the increase in global average temperature to 1.5 degrees. So as Xenia quite rightly said, the intention of this webinar is not to give you an extensive list of all environmental legislation. Instead, we're going to be giving you an overview of particularly pertinent topics relating to the hospitality sector. And importantly, we're going to highlight what the implications are for your hospitality business and give examples of actions that can be taken where relevant. So we'll start by looking at the European Green Deal a little bit. So this provides a roadmap for how carbon neutrality can be achieved by 2050. Carbon neutrality meaning that as a collective, the EU must be responsible for removing as much carbon dioxide from the environment as it emits. So to do so, action plans have either already been developed or are in the process of being developed on these 8 key topics. For such reason, we're likely to see tightening legislation at a national level in Europe relating to all of these. However, I will state again that these are incredibly important topics to all EU and non-EU member countries because they highlight areas of absolute importance and, as I said, relate back to that overall target of limiting global average temperature increase. Now, a core part of the European Green Deal is the Circular Economy Action Plan, which is really entrenched in all of these topics I've just mentioned. So as part of the European Green Deal, the EU has revised its Circular Economy Action Plan, which was initially launched in 2015. So this new action plan presents initiatives along the entire life cycle of products. And this is really the key here. It's a mentality shift as much as anything. So we have to change how we consume and how we use products. So right through from conceptualization of the product, through to recycling and reusing it, and avoiding absolutely as much waste as possible in the process. So as I said there, the aim is to reduce waste, and the aim is to do that in the most resource consuming sectors, of which hospitality is almost certainly one. And I'll pass you over to Isaac to discuss that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Bud. Yeah, so as Bud said, obviously waste is a big issue, but where do we fit in as hospitality sectors with waste and also all of these environmental legislations? Well, it's important to consider our impact, just to get a bit of relevance and a bit of context to the legislation. And actually, our industry has a huge impact on the environment in a number of ways through our direct operations, our supply chains, any partnerships we may have, etc., which can make tackling these issues and understanding the significant quite difficult due to the breadth of them. So as a good, but certainly not comprehensive starting point, we've outlined 2 areas that can almost always be related back to energy and waste and the role that they play within hospitality, or sorry, the role that hospitality plays within each. So to set the scene, Globally, buildings contribute 8% of total greenhouse gas emissions, while in the EU, they consume 40% of all energy. And as operators of buildings, we can have a valuable influence on this through our use of energy in heating, air conditioning, lighting, for example. Similarly, for waste, our sector is responsible for a large portion, 12% of Europe's total food waste, while in the UK alone, hotels produce almost 300,000 tons of waste. And again, the way our operations are managed can hugely impact and contribute to these figures. So hopefully these figures provide a bit of context and outline the importance of environmental issues and any relevant legislation to our sector. Now, the first of the Green Deal areas is sustainable industry. And the goal here is to reduce waste and resource use of all industries, but particularly the most harmful sectors such as plastics and steel, while simultaneously decarbonising and modernising our industries and developing climate neutral practices. So at a national level, a good example to take is in the UK, where legislation to ban plastic straws, stirrers and cotton buds has just entered Parliament and is really likely to pass. And the impacts on hospitality businesses still using them will obviously mean that they have to change suppliers, change sources, but there'll also be an impact on the suppliers of these. So for us, clearly the relevance, the direct impacts, there's a tightening policy on resource use, be it plastic or any other legislations, whereas the indirect impacts, such as industries like plastics, where we're getting a lot of our packaging from, or textiles, such as where we're getting our towels or sheets, may also be hit hard with increasing costs and disruption to supply chains as a result of the legislations. And Xenia will just take us through a bit of what we've been doing with Urca Collection.
Yes, thanks, Isaac. So yeah, we decided in 2018 that we were going to put a major plastic ban on items that were available in each of the hotels of the collection to eliminate those quickly and across the board. That was done and achievable within sort of 6 months. And then the next step was really to start looking at the more difficult ones to eliminate, talk to our suppliers, work with our suppliers, as it not to hit, the budgets too badly, and see where you can make some savings before, you start working on new products that potentially could be more costly. So the key thing is to have a strategy when you start doing this, and not to say, oh, flat out ban, and then suddenly realize 6 months down the line that you can't achieve it because you haven't actually planned it carefully. Back to you, Isaac.
Thanks, Xenia. Now, the second Green Deal topic is sustainable mobility. So transport in Europe, as many of us probably know, is a big contributor to greenhouse gases, and it accounts for almost 1/4 of all of EU emissions. So it's a massive, massive deal. And this goal is designed to counteract that and shift our transport systems towards a more sustainable level, encouraging shifts to alternative fuels, stricter pollution standards on cars, and emissions taxes on high polluting industries like air travel. And at a national level, this can be manifest in a number of ways. For example, amendments to transport acts, such as in the UK, enabling the implementation of low emission zones, which we see in many cities across Europe and not just London. And alternatively, there may be plans to improve and increase access to public transport, sustainable transport methods like physical mobility, so bike lanes, walkways. So for us in the hospitality sector, the knock-on effects may relate to an increased demand for electric charging points. Implementations of low emission zones may affect the use of cars, of guests getting to our hotels, and potentially deliveries as well. And there may also be rising costs for air travel, or at least pressures to reduce it, which can impact the movement of people. And particularly post-COVID, no one really knows the lay of the land yet, so it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And again, Xenia is just going to take us through a little bit of something that we've done at Considerate.
Yes, so the Bristol and Paris ahead of the times, because now everybody is going to want to avoid public transport as much as possible in cities. They got these wonderful electric bikes, gave them their own branding. So you've got that snazzy green, and offered it as a guest experience for those interested in doing something eco-friendly in a city, which is not that easy. Huge success. People go out on picnics. They also do delivery on e-bikes of the picnics to the parks. And it gives you a great opportunity to do good marketing, so social media posts, as you can see on the right there. So always something nice to be offering to the guests that enhances your story. Back to you.
Right, so number 3, the third topic, is clean energy. Now, this area is solely focused on decarbonising the EU energy sector through renewable implementations and increasing efficiencies. And it all stems from the RED, in which the target is for member states to reduce 32% renewable energy use by 2030. So at a national level, this is governed by NREAPs, but they're shifting to an integrated national plans as of next year. But more importantly, the key thing for hospitality businesses here is to be on the lookout for financial incentives for renewable energy. So there's lots of European and national funding finding its way through many different streams to businesses and residential buildings alike. And these can be really effective ways of reducing energy costs and becoming more sustainable at the same time. So a good example is perhaps Scotland's Community and Renewable Energy Scheme, where up to £25,000 can be applied for to grant, or can be granted, sorry, to investigate the feasibility of renewable projects. And up to a further £150,000 can be granted for projects with a really high chance of success. And again, Xenia will just take us through that example.
Yeah, so this is the island of Mustique, which obviously, as we all know, is not Europe, but we wanted to use this because it's a great example of a standalone destination that decided it had to, well, they have to generate their own electricity anyway. So trying to avoid the climate risk of bringing in diesel on a ship for the generator, they have plenty of sun, as we know. They identified areas where they could easily install solar. Here you see the desal plant, which is obviously another resource that needs to be taken care of on the island. So that becomes a sort of standalone circular process there as well. We've had Tesla batteries installed for storage. So now the electricity generated on the island covers about 20% of the island's consumption, with a plan to roll it out in 2025. So this is a great example. When you are a standalone company or resort, you can allow yourself to do that.
Thanks, Xenia. So our fourth one is buildings and renovation, which follows on quite nicely from the previous one of clean energy. And the principal aim here is to improve the energy efficiency of buildings and increase the uptake of energy efficiency renovations and retrofits. And again, largely driven by the EED, where similar targets, member states have to reach 32.5% energy efficiency in 2030, was also supplemented by initiatives like the NZEB. And again, national incentives here are fairly consistent across Europe as they're driven from the same directive. A good example is the White Certificate scheme, in which obligations are placed on energy suppliers and distributors to provide energy savings for businesses and homes. For example, there may be drastically reduced or even free insulation to small businesses and homes. So something to be on the lookout for. So clearly already this is relevant to us. We can fall into that category. And again, financial incentives are the key drivers for this sort of Green Deal topic. But also there's a big impact on new builds and renovations as well, with increasingly stringent regulations around the standards they're going to have to adhere to. And indeed, as of next year, 2021, all new builds or renovations in Europe must adhere to the Nearly Zero Energy Buildings Law. So it's certainly something to think about when planning upgrades or any improvements. And just quickly over to Xenia for a little example.
Yes, so we've got the Green Wall at the Rubens Hotel, part of the Red Carnation Group here in London, Victoria. They obviously had rather ugly walls that they needed to cover anyway, so great opportunity and well seized for these green walls. They insulate, so they keep the heat nicely in the winter. They cool in the summer, less use for air conditioning. They offer habitats for insect and therefore food for birds. They make it nicer in the area and also clean the air. So it's a win-win on all fronts, and it's been sort of a great advertising tool for the hotel as well.
Okay, that comes back to me with eliminating pollution. So this refers to the Zero Pollution Action Plan to prevent pollution of air, water and soil. So there are many measures to achieve this, relating to other topics that Isaac's been through, so with sustainable industry, and with other topics that I'm going to discuss, so biodiversity and farm to fork strategy. But another vital part of this is waste. Now, if we look at specific countries, France is a country which is currently not in line to meet its recycling targets for 2030 of 70%. For this reason, we're seeing a great deal of recent legislation of France involving waste of unsold goods and plastics and many others. And we can really expect to see this mirrored globally. And so a lot of other countries will follow suit in this regard. So this stands to impact the hospitality sector very directly, particularly regarding legal requirements surrounding recycling measures and the use of single-use plastic items, which Isaac touched on. It's absolutely more important now than ever to develop waste baseline analysis strategies and be aware of waste streams and their volumes, and to ensure that waste is also being disposed of correctly. And I can pass you over to Xenia to talk a little bit more about how that can be implemented.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, waste is sort of an unsexy topic to touch on, but it's key. And as Bud just said, now more than ever with COVID-19, waste is obviously an area where a lot of bacteria develops. So the key thing is to establish your waste baseline, understand what are your waste streams, where can you separate within a building, within an operation, who's in charge of it, are you training your staff, are you equipping them properly so that you can really break all the waste down in as many streams as possible, and then obviously have that conversation also with your waste companies. So then you can really make a difference and ensure that you're reducing waste at source, but also that it's then being recycled properly. So that's really, really important. Back to you, Bud.
Okay, thank you. The farm to fork. Now this topic looks at the food industry, right from production to consumption and all the way through to disposal. Now, a large focus of this will be on ensuring food production processes don't contribute negatively to the environment. So this is in the form of legislation around the use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers and antibiotics and all the other horrible stuff. And then the next stage of this is then storage and transport of produce, which is obviously incredibly resource consuming, especially for countries who don't have a great deal of farmland and rely heavily on imports. And then the last stage of this looks to tackle food waste. And again, we can look at a national level at France, for example, which have been very well publicized in recent years for increasing measures to reduce the amount of food waste, with the aim of reducing it by half by 2025. So they've been implementing measures that look at capping supermarkets for disposing of food that's still fit for use, and this is likely to expand into the hospitality sector there. So we can expect to see this mirrored in other countries. And that's why it's incredibly relevant to the hospitality industry. And so we'll look at that now. So this shows us the farm to fork strategy in relation to the circular economy action plan. Now there are a few key themes that I'll touch on here. Sustainable supply chains being absolutely vital. So ensuring you know what you're buying and you know where you're buying from. So implementing purchasing policies, which may aim to have a certain percentage of produce come from organic sources, looking to reduce your food miles and sourcing seasonally, and overall building a more transparent supply chain. The next stage of this is obviously food waste, which I've just touched upon, and there are many actions which hospitality businesses can take to reduce food waste, and we've developed some great toolkits on how you can do this, so if you're interested, then do get in touch. Again, the importance here is a change in mentality. Once you're aware and once you're tracking the waste, you'll start to see drastic improvements. And finally, better informed citizens. So communicating with your customers the story of the food that they're consuming. So consumers are more aware than ever about the choices they're making and ethical decisions. So taking steps to reduce waste and source locally can not only improve your top and bottom line, but can also be an excellent marketing tool. And I'll pass you on to Xenia to give you a good example of that.
Yeah, now in comparison to waste, here you can actually have fun. Food is fun. People love eating. Here's a great example, Heckfield Place, which is a resort, obviously. They took the decision right from the beginning to also have a farm. They've got their home farm, which has now also become a destination for local schools and local businesses to come and learn about biodynamic farming, which is great. They produce enough produce, not just for the restaurants of the hotel and the one in London, but also to ship them out in organic boxes. Another huge opportunity, obviously, here for marketing, social media, and to put it in all your collateral materials and get the guests involved as well. But the other thing is, obviously, we know not every hotel has the luxury of having that space. However, you can always look for local organizations or projects within your borough or within your area to get the staff involved. We always find it's great for team building. They have a lot of fun, and when you know that you've got produce coming from within your area, it sort of increases also the trust with your guests and the pride of the staff working with that. So it's really a great area to focus on and get your staff involved. Back to you, Bud.
Absolutely, thank you. So our 7th topic is biodiversity. Now, this new biodiversity strategy focuses on topics ranging from restoring damaged ecosystems all the way to the blue economy. But a real significant focus on this will be creating green spaces in cities. And to do this, they'll be injecting a great deal of funding into these areas. For this reason, we can expect to see a national level masses of change in regulatory regards. So the UK, for example, which had its goals for 2020 and missed nearly all of them, so I think 14 out of 19 with its biodiversity strategy. So we're going to expect to see big changes and a lot of implementation in this regard in coming years. Now, if we look at this with relevancy to hospitality, again, I'll hammer home the point of a sustainable supply chain, so ensuring your produce is sourced from suppliers who incorporate biodiversity into their operations just as you do. And in terms of direct impacts, we're seeing increasing regulations relating to new builds and refits, as Isaac touched on earlier. And further to this, increased requirements to protect native species and avoid the use of invasive and alien species. And a great way that you can do this as a hospitality business is working with local biodiversity charities, which I'll pass you over to Xenia again to give a little bit more detail on.
Yeah, so here's an example of a hotel in Germany, the Brenner's Park Hotel and Spa in Baden-Baden, but we encourage a lot of our hotels to do this. Find a local organization who specializes on, protecting of local habitats, species, or biodiversity. So it's something that you support locally. Again, the guests can benefit from either visiting. In this case, what we've done is also that you can offer the guests the opportunity to pay €10 per room night spent, and it goes to this organization, and you know that they're looking after something that's important to your environment and your local biodiversity, and it has the highest impact. Back to you, Bud.
Thank you. So this is our 8th and final topic, climate action. So this really, the European climate law, which was passed in March, sets to make the target of climate neutrality by 2050 legally binding for EU member countries. Therefore, we can expect increased legislation regarding all of the previously mentioned topics that we've just been discussing in order to meet this target. Therefore, hotels should be very aware of the scale of these targets and try and adopt them and incorporate them into their own business operations. However, I'll state again that these topics are incredibly relevant to all countries globally. So these really set out how we can achieve the overall target of limiting global average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. And that brings us to an end.
Yes, thank you, Bud and Isaac. That was brilliant. So we've covered the 8 main areas that we've taken out of those legislations. As both Bud and Isaac underlined, this is relevant to everywhere. We've all got to reach the same global goals when it comes to climate change. These are perfect guidelines for us to stick to. They're relevant to us in the hospitality sector. We hope we've given you a good oversight. As you know, we've got toolkits available also to help you with some of those topics. So do get in touch. We've also got more webinars coming up. The next one is actually in 3 weeks' time, on Wednesday, the 10th of June. And we will be covering, Bud and I will be covering the jungle of certifications that are out there in the hospitality sector. So do join us for that. Anything else, if you've missed one of our other webinars, you can watch them on our YouTube channel. And if you want anything concerning this webinar, please do get in touch. There's the email address. And unless anybody else has got any questions now, and I don't see any in the Q&A section, I will end today's webinar and thank you all very much for attending. Thank you. Bye.